Jake Morrison walked down the long hallway of Kepler Station University, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. The metal walls hummed with the quiet sounds of the space station, and through the large windows, he could see the endless stars outside. He had been on the station for only 3 days, but it still felt strange to be so far from Earth. He stopped in front of a door marked Advanced Xenobiology, Room 847, and took a deep breath. This was his first real class with alien students, and he had no idea what to expect. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake stepped inside. The classroom was huge, much bigger than any room he had seen at his old university on Earth. Ceilings stretched high above, and the walls were covered with screens showing pictures of strange planets and creatures. But what made Jake pause was not the room itself. It was the students. 37 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. Not one of them was human. Jake had seen aliens before, of course. There were a few working on the station, and he had watched plenty of videos during his preparation for the exchange program. But being in a room full of them was different. It felt real in a way that made his heart beat faster. The closest students to the door were tall and thin, almost like living glass. Their skin was so clear that Jake could see the light passing through them. These had to be Etherians, he remembered from his study materials. They were known for being peaceful and quiet, but right now they seemed to be whispering to each other, while looking at him. Behind them sat a group of shorter, wider beings that looked like they were made of rock. Their skin was gray and rough, with small crystals growing out of their shoulders and arms. The Corvin, Jake recalled. They were supposed to be very strong and lived on planets with high gravity. One of them was staring at Jake so hard that he felt uncomfortable. Near the back of the room, Jake saw creatures that looked like giant insects. They had 6 arms each and large compound eyes that sparkled in the light. The Zephyrians clicked and buzzed as they talked to each other, their voices making sounds that Jake's ears were not used to hearing. There were other species too, ones that Jake had only read about in books. Some had fur, others had scales, and a few looked like they might be made of energy itself. But they all had one thing in common. They were all looking at him like he was the most dangerous thing in the room. Jake found an empty seat near the middle of the classroom and sat down. As soon as he did, the students closest to him moved their chairs away. Not far, just a few inches, but enough that Jake noticed. The Etherian girl next to him became so transparent that he could barely see her. "Is this seat taken?" Jake asked, trying to be friendly. The Etherian girl made a sound like wind through leaves and shook her head quickly. She did not look at him when she answered. Jake set his backpack down and pulled out his tablet and stylus. He tried to ignore the way the other students were still staring at him. Some of them were not even trying to hide it. A Corvin boy 3 rows back was turned completely around in his seat, watching Jake like he was a wild animal that might attack at any moment. The door at the front of the room opened, and a new figure walked in. This had to be the professor, though Jake had never seen anything like him before. The creature was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that changed color as he moved. His head was large and round, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. When he spoke, his voice was deep and musical. "Good morning, students," the professor said, his skin shifting from blue to purple. "I am Dr. Zix then, and this is Advanced Xenobiology. Before we begin, I want to introduce our new exchange student." Jake felt all the eyes in the room focus on him again. His face grew warm, but he stood up as the professor gestured toward him. "This is Jake Morrison from Earth," Dr. Zix then continued. "He is here as part of the Galactic Education Exchange Program. Jake comes from what we classify as a Class 12 Deathworld." A ripple of sound went through the classroom. Some students gasped, others clicked or buzzed with worry. The Etherian girl next to Jake became completely invisible for a moment before slowly fading back into view. Now, Dr. Zixton said, his skin turning a calming green color. There is no need for alarm. Jake is here to learn, just like all of you. His presence will actually be very valuable for our studies this semester. Jake sat back down, confused by the reaction. He knew Earth was considered dangerous by galactic standards, but he had not expected this level of fear. He was just a college student, not some kind of warrior or monster. Can anyone tell me what makes a death world so dangerous? Dr. Zixton asked the class. A Corvin boy raised one of his rocky hands. High gravity, extreme weather, and dangerous. Predators, Professor. Correct, Moryak. What else? A Zephyrian clicked her mandibles together before speaking. Toxic atmosphere, unstable geology, and frequent natural disasters. Excellent, Zixara. And what about the beings that evolve on such worlds? The classroom fell silent. No one seemed to want to answer this question. While Jake was sitting right there, Dr. Zixton's skin shifted to yellow, which Jake guessed meant he was amused. The beings that evolve on death worlds develop traits that help them survive in impossible conditions. They become stronger, faster, and more adaptable than species from safer worlds. They also develop something else, something that makes them very different from us. The professor looked directly at Jake. They lose their fear of dangerous things. What would terrify us becomes normal to them. What would kill us becomes just another challenge to overcome. Jake shifted in his seat. He did not feel particularly fearless or strong. He was just a regular guy who happened to be born on a planet that other species found scary. This semester, Dr. Zixton continued, we will be studying some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Specimens from death worlds across the known systems. Having Jake here will help us understand how beings from such worlds interact with these creatures. An Etherean boy near the front raised his hand. His voice was so quiet that Jake could barely hear him. Professor, is it safe to have a Deathworlder in the same room as us? Jake felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He wanted to say something, to explain that he was not dangerous, but Dr. Zixton spoke first. Jake has been cleared by station security and medical, the professor said. He poses no threat to any of you. However, I do ask that you all treat him with the same respect you would show any classmate. The professor's skin turned a deep blue, and Jake got the feeling that this was his serious color. Now, let us begin today's lesson. We will start with an overview of Deathworld classification systems. As Dr. Zixton began his lecture, Jake tried to focus on taking notes, but he could not stop thinking about the way his classmates looked at him. He had come here to learn about alien life, to make friends with beings from other worlds, and to prove that humans could be good members of the galactic community. Instead, he found himself sitting alone in a room full of students who were afraid of him. And the worst part was, he had no idea why. Jake had been attending Dr. Zixton's class for 2 weeks now, and things had not gotten much better. The other students still moved away when he sat down. They still whispered about him when they thought he could not hear. The Etherean girl next to him, whose name he had learned was Galana, only spoke to him when the professor asked them to work in pairs. But Jake kept coming to class. The subject was fascinating, even if the social situation was difficult. Dr. Zixton was a good teacher, and Jake was learning amazing things about life on other worlds. Today, however, felt different. The professor had sent a message the night before telling all students to wear their safety gear and arrive early. Jake walked into the classroom 15 minutes before the scheduled start time. Most of the other students were already there, but they looked nervous. The Corvin students had their protective crystals glowing brighter than usual, which Jake had learned meant they were stressed. The Zephyrians were clicking to each other in rapid, worried tones. Even the usually calm Etherians seemed more solid than normal, as if they were preparing for danger. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Zixton said as he entered the room. His skin was a steady blue color, which Jake had learned meant he was focused and serious. "Today we will be doing something different. Instead of looking at pictures and videos, you will observe a live specimen." A murmur of excitement and fear went through the classroom. Jake noticed that several students glanced at him when the professor mentioned a live specimen. He wondered if this had something to do with him being there. "The specimen is being brought up from the high-security research level," Dr. Zixton continued. "It is contained in a Level 5 containment unit, which is completely safe. However, I want everyone to remember the safety protocols we discussed." Jake pulled out his tablet and opened his notes on safety protocols. Level 5 containment was serious business. It was used for creatures that could potentially harm multiple people, even when contained. He had never seen anything that required that level of security. The door at the back of the classroom opened, and 2 station security officers entered. They wore full protective gear and carried energy weapons. Behind them came a maintenance robot, pushing something covered by a heavy metal sheet. The thing underneath was big, really big. Jake watched as the security officers positioned themselves on either side of the covered object. The maintenance robot rolled to the front of the room and stopped. Dr. Zixton approached it carefully, even though whatever was underneath was supposed to be safely contained. "Before I reveal the specimen," the professor said, "I want everyone to understand what you are about to see. This creature comes from a planet called Grimhold, which is classified as a Class 9 death world." Jake sat up straighter. Class 9 was serious. Earth was only Class 12, and that was considered very dangerous by galactic standards. The lower the number, the more deadly the world. "The creature is called a shadow maw," Dr. Zixton continued. "It is an apex predator, meaning it sits at the top of its food chain. It has no natural enemies on its home world, except others of its own species." The professor's skin shifted to a dark purple, which Jake had never seen before. "I want everyone to stay in their seats. Do not approach the containment unit. Do not make sudden movements. And most importantly, do not panic." Dr. Zixton reached for the metal sheet and pulled it away. Jake heard several students gasp. One of the Zephyrians made a high-pitched buzzing sound that hurt Jake's ears. The Etherian girl next to him became completely invisible, and Jake could hear her rapid breathing, even though he could not see her. Inside the containment unit was the most terrifying creature Jake had ever seen. It was huge, standing almost as tall as Jake, even though it was on 4 legs. Its body was covered in black fur that seemed to absorb light, making it look like a living shadow. The creature had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows, each one glowing, with an amber light that cut through the darkness of its fur. But it was the teeth that really got everyone's attention. When the creature opened its mouth, Jake could see rows of crystal-clear fangs that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. Each tooth was as long as Jake's finger, and there were dozens of them. The creature was pacing back and forth in its cage, and every step made a sound like thunder. Its claws scraped against the floor of the containment unit, leaving deep scratches in the metal. When it breathed, Jake could see clouds of vapor coming from its nostrils. "This is a male shadow maw, approximately 8 years old," Dr. Zixton said, though his voice was not as steady as usual. "Adult males can grow to be twice this size. Note the adaptive camouflage in the fur, which helps it blend with the shadows of its home world." Jake looked around the classroom. Half the students looked like they were about to run away. The Corvin students had turned their bodies to stone, their natural defense mechanism. Several Etherians had disappeared completely. The Zephyrians were huddled together in the back corner, their wings buzzing with terror. The Shadow Maw hunts using a combination of physical prowess and psychic abilities, the professor continued. It projects an aura of fear that paralyzes its prey. This aura affects most sentient species, making them unable to think clearly or move effectively. As if to demonstrate, the creature in the cage stopped pacing and looked directly at the class. Jake felt something wash over him, like a cold wind that carried the smell of death and darkness. Around him, he could hear students whimpering and crying. The Etherean girl next to him reappeared just long enough for Jake to see that she was shaking with terror before she vanished again. But Jake found that he could still think clearly. The feeling was unpleasant, like being in a haunted house or walking alone in a dark forest, but it did not paralyze him the way it seemed to affect the others. The psychic pressure is quite intense, Dr. Zixton said, and Jake noticed that. The professor was standing much farther from the cage than he had been a moment before. Even through the containment field, the effect is noticeable. The Shadow Maw turned its attention to different parts of the room, and wherever its gaze fell, students seemed to freeze up even more. When its 6 eyes focused on the Corvin section, the stone-like students actually started to crack under the pressure. When it looked at the Zephyrians, their buzzing became so high-pitched that it was almost painful to hear. Then the creature's gaze fell on Jake. The other students seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen to the human when the full force of the Shadow Maw's psychic attack hit him. Jake felt the pressure increase, like standing in front of a blast furnace, but he did not freeze up or panic. Instead, he found himself studying the creature more carefully. Up close, he could see things that the others might have missed because of their fear. The way the Shadow Maw favored its left rear leg when it walked. The small wound on its side that had not healed properly. The way its breathing was too fast and shallow. Interesting, Dr. Zixton said, his skin shifting to a surprised yellow color. Jake seems to be less affected by the psychic pressure than the rest of us. Jake barely heard the professor's words. He was too busy watching the creature. Something was wrong with it. Something beyond just being a dangerous predator. The more he looked, the more he was sure of it. The Shadow Maw was not just scary. It was scared. Jake continued to watch the Shadow Maw, while his classmates remained frozen in terror. The creature had stopped looking around the room, and was now focused entirely on him. Its 6 amber eyes studied Jake with what seemed like curiosity rather than hunger. The psychic pressure was still there, washing over the classroom in waves, but Jake found it easier to ignore the longer he looked at the creature. As you can see, Dr. Zixton said, his voice carefully controlled, the Shadow Maw is one of the most dangerous predators in known space. It has been responsible for the deaths of over 300 researchers and hunters who attempted to study or capture specimens. The professor moved to his desk, keeping as much distance as possible between himself and the containment unit. His skin had shifted to a nervous green color. The psychic intimidation field it projects can cause permanent mental damage to most species. Even our strongest sedatives have little effect on creatures from such hostile environments. Jake raised his hand. Professor, when was this one captured? Dr. Zixton looked surprised by the question. According to the research files, it was taken from Grimhold approximately 3 standard cycles ago. Why do you ask? Has it eaten anything since? Then, Jake asked, still watching the creature. No, the professor replied, consulting his tablet. Shadow Maws are notoriously difficult to feed in captivity. They refuse all food sources we have offered. The research team believes it may be attempting to starve itself rather than remain in confinement. Jake nodded slowly. That explained some of what he was seeing. The creature was thinner than the pictures he had seen in his study materials. Its fur had lost some of its shine, and there were dark circles around its eyes that spoke of exhaustion and stress. It looks sick, Jake said, more to himself than to anyone else. Sick? Dr. Zix then repeated. The medical scans show no disease or infection. What makes you think it appears ill? Jake stood up slowly, ignoring the sounds of panic from his classmates. Several Etherians disappeared completely, and he heard one of the Corvin students whisper a prayer in their native language. Look at its posture, Professor. The way it holds its head low, the shallow breathing, the way it keeps checking the exits. The professor looked at the creature more carefully, though Jake noticed he did not move any closer to the containment unit. I see the behaviors you mention, but those are normal stress responses for a caged predator. Maybe, Jake said, but I think there's more to it than that. Without thinking about it, Jake started walking toward the containment unit. Behind him, he heard gasps and cries of alarm from his classmates. The Zephyrian girl in the third row started buzzing so loudly that it sounded like a fire alarm. Jake, please return to your seat, Dr. Zix then said, his skin flashing between yellow and red. The containment field is secure, but proximity to the specimen is not recommended. Jake stopped about 3 feet from the cage. This close, the psychic pressure was much stronger. It felt like standing in a storm, with waves of fear and aggression washing over him. But underneath all that, Jake sensed something else. Something that reminded him of the injured animals his grandfather used to treat at his veterinary clinic back on Earth. The Shadowmaw had stopped pacing and was now standing perfectly still. All 6 eyes focused on Jake. Its breathing had slowed down, and the aggressive posture had relaxed slightly. The creature tilted its massive head to one side, as if it was trying to figure out what Jake was. Incredible, Dr. Zix then whispered. The psychic field seems to be weakening. I have never seen anything like this. Jake knelt down, so he was at eye level with the creature. Hey there, big guy, he said softly. You're pretty far from home, aren't you? The Shadowmaw made a sound that Jake had not heard before. It was not quite a growl, but it was not aggressive either. It sounded almost like a question. Jake, what are you doing? The Lana whispered from her seat. She had become visible again, though Jake could see she was still trembling. I'm trying to understand what's wrong with it, Jake replied, not taking his eyes off the creature. My grandfather always said that scared animals and angry animals look different if you know what to watch for. Scared? Dr. Zix then repeated. Jake, this is an apex predator from one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. What could it possibly be afraid of? Jake thought about that question while he studied the Shadowmaw. The creature had moved closer to the front of its cage, bringing its face near the transparent barrier. Up close, Jake could see small details that might not be visible from farther away. Everything, Jake said finally. Think about it, Professor. This creature evolved on a world where everything is trying to kill everything else. Its whole life has been about survival. Now it's trapped in a small box, surrounded by strange smells and sounds, being stared at by dozens of potential threats. The Shadowmaw pressed its nose against the barrier, just inches from Jake's face. Its breathing had slowed down even more, and the amber glow in its eyes seemed less intense. From its perspective, Jake continued, we're the predators, and it's the prey. It doesn't know if we're going to hurt it, experiment on it, or kill it. It's probably been waiting for 3 months for us to make our move. Dr. Zix then made several notes on his tablet. That is a fascinating perspective, Jake. However, the research data clearly shows that Shadowmaws are aggressive by nature. They attack anything that enters their territory. On their home world, maybe, Jake agreed. But this isn't its territory. This is our territory, and it knows it. He pointed to the creature's posture. Look at how it's standing. That's not an attack position. That's a defensive position. It's ready to fight if it has to, but it would rather not. The professor moved a little closer, though he was still much farther from the cage than Jake was. The behavioral analysis programs did not identify these patterns. How are you able to see them? Jake shrugged. I grew up around animals. My grandfather was a veterinarian, and I spent a lot of time at his clinic. You learn to read body language when you're dealing with creatures that can't talk to you. But surely the behavioral patterns of an alien creature would be completely different from Earth animals, Dr. Zixton said. Some things are universal, Jake replied. Fear looks the same whether you have 2 legs or 4 legs or 6 eyes. Pain looks the same. Loneliness looks the same. As if responding to Jake's words, the Shadow Maw made that questioning sound again. It was louder this time, and Jake thought he heard something almost like sadness in it. It's trying to communicate, Jake said, excitement creeping into his voice. Professor, I think it's trying to tell us something. The classroom had gone completely silent. Even the most terrified students were watching now, fascinated despite their fear. The Shadow Maw seemed to sense the change in the room's atmosphere. Its psychic field had weakened so much that several Etherians had become fully visible again. What do you think it's trying to say? Dr. Zixton asked. Jake placed his palm flat against the barrier, directly in front of the creature's face. The Shadow Maw stared at his hand for a long moment, then did something that made everyone in the room gasp. It pressed its own massive paw against the barrier, matching Jake's gesture. I think, Jake said quietly, it's trying to say hello. The moment Jake's palm touched the barrier and the Shadow Maw pressed its paw against the same spot, something changed in the classroom. The air itself seemed different, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. The psychic pressure that had been crushing down on everyone suddenly became much lighter. Jake could hear his classmates breathing again. Some of the Etherians became fully visible for the first time since the creature had been revealed. The Corvin students slowly shifted back from their stone-like defensive state, their crystal growths dimming to normal levels. Impossible, Dr. Zixton whispered, his skin cycling through several colors rapidly. The psychic intimidation field has decreased by over 70%. How is this happening? Jake kept his hand pressed against the barrier, maintaining eye contact with the Shadow Maw. The creature's 6 amber eyes were fixed on his face, and Jake could swear he saw intelligence looking back at him. Not just animal cunning, but real understanding. I think it knows I'm not afraid of it, Jake said softly. Or at least not afraid. In the way it expected. Not afraid? Valana spoke up from her seat, her voice shaky but curious. How can you not be afraid? It's a monster from a death world. Jake turned slightly to look at her, though he kept his hand on the barrier. It's not a monster, Valana. It's just an animal. A very big, very dangerous animal, but still just an animal. And right now, it's scared and lonely and far from home. The Shadow Maw made that questioning sound again, softer this time. Jake turned back to face it and found that all 6 eyes were still watching him intently. Yeah, I know. Big guy, Jake said in the same gentle tone he had used with nervous dogs at his grandfather's clinic. This is all pretty weird for you too, isn't it? Dr. Zixton approached slowly, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. Jake, what you're doing should not be possible. The Shadow Maw's psychic field is designed to paralyze potential threats. It's an evolutionary advantage that has kept them alive on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. Maybe that's the problem, Jake replied, still keeping his voice calm and low. It keeps trying to scare me away, but I'm not going anywhere. So now it doesn't know what to do. The professor made more notes on his tablet. The behavioral readings are unlike anything in our database. The creature's stress hormones are decreasing rapidly. Its heart rate has slowed to what we would consider a resting state. Jake noticed that the Shadow Maw was pressing harder against the barrier, as if it was trying to get closer to him. The massive creature had moved from a defensive crouch to a more relaxed position, though it was still alert and ready to react if needed. Can I ask you something, Professor? Jake said, not moving from his spot by the cage. Of course. Why did you really want a human in this class? It wasn't just for educational diversity, was it? Dr. Zixton's skin shifted to a deep purple color. That, Jake had learned, meant the professor was thinking carefully. You are correct. When I heard that a Deathworld specimen was being brought to the station, I specifically requested a student from a similar environment. I thought it might provide ... unique insights. You wanted to see what would happen when a predator met another predator, Jake said. In simple terms, yes, the professor admitted, though I did not expect anything like this. Jake finally understood why his classmates had been so afraid of him from the first day. They did not just see him as a student from a dangerous world. They saw him as the same type of creature as the thing in the cage. A killer. A monster. I'm not like it, you know, Jake said, loud enough for the whole class to hear. I mean, I understand it better than you do, maybe, but I'm not a predator. Humans aren't really predators at all, not in the way you think. But Earth is a Class 12 death world, Moriak, one of the Corvin students, said. Only the most dangerous. Creatures can survive there. Jake smiled sadly. Dangerous to you, maybe. But we didn't survive because we were the strongest or the fastest or the most aggressive. We survived because we learned to work together. We survived because we could understand other creatures, even the dangerous ones. As if to prove his point, the Shadowmaw made a new sound. It was deeper than the questioning noise, almost like a rumble. Jake felt the vibration through the barrier. It's purring, Jake said with amazement. Purring? Dr. Zix then repeated. Shadowmaws do not purr. They are not capable of producing sounds associated with contentment or pleasure. Well, this one is, Jake said. The rumbling sound was getting louder, and Jake could feel it in his chest now. Listen. The entire classroom fell silent, listening to the strange new sound coming from the creature that had terrified them just minutes before. It was deep and rhythmic, almost like a giant cat purring. Remarkable, Dr. Zixton said, his skin now a bright yellow color that indicated excitement. I must contact the research team immediately. This behavior has never been documented. Jake slowly moved his other hand to the barrier, placing both palms against the transparent wall. The Shadowmaw responded by pressing both of its front paws against the same spots, creating a mirror image of Jake's gesture. Hey there, Jake said softly. You're not so scary after all, are you? You're just tired and scared, and you want to go home. The creature's rumbling increased in volume, and its eyes began to glow more softly. The aggressive tension that had filled its body was completely gone now. It looked almost relaxed. Jake, Alana said, her voice filled with wonder. How did? You know it would react this way? I didn't, Jake admitted. I just treated it the way I would want to be treated if I was scared and alone. Sometimes that's all it takes. One of the Zephyrian students, Zixara, clicked her mandibles together nervously before speaking. On my world, we have stories about creatures that can calm the savage beasts. We always thought they were just myths. Not myths, Jake said. Just ... understanding. This guy isn't savage. He's just been treated like he was savage for so long that he started acting the part. Dr. Zixton was frantically taking notes and recordings. The implications of this interaction are staggering. If we can establish communication protocols with Deathworld apex predators, it could revolutionize our understanding of these ecosystems. Jake looked at the professor seriously. Before you start making plans, Professor, you need to think about what's best for him. He gestured to the Shadowmaw. This isn't a laboratory specimen. This is a thinking, feeling creature that's been taken from everything it knows. The Shadowmaw seemed to sense that Jake was talking about it. It pressed closer to the barrier, and the purring sound became even louder. For the first time since entering the classroom, it looked truly peaceful. "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Zix then asked. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop treating him like a monster and start treating him like what he really is," Jake replied. "A scared animal that just wants to go home." The classroom remained silent as everyone considered Jake's words. The shadow maw continued to purr, creating a sound like distant thunder that somehow felt comforting rather than threatening. For the first time since arriving at the university, Jake felt like he belonged somewhere. Jake remained by the containment unit for several more minutes, his hands pressed against the barrier while the shadow maw continued its deep, rumbling purr. The sound had become so constant that it almost felt like a heartbeat filling the room. His classmates had gradually moved closer, their fear replaced by curiosity and wonder. Dr. Zix finished making his notes and looked up at Jake with what could only be described as amazement. His skin had settled into a steady golden color that Jake had never seen before. "Jake," the professor said, "I need to ask you some questions about what just happened here." Jake slowly moved his hands away from the barrier. The shadow maw watched him closely, but did not become agitated. Instead, it settled down into a lying position, though it kept all 6 eyes focused on Jake. "Sure, Professor," Jake said, turning to face the class. "But first, can I ask you all something?" The other students looked surprised. In the 2 weeks Jake had been in the class, he had never addressed all of them at once. "When you look at me," Jake said, "what do you see?" Velana was the first to speak. "We see a Deathworlder," she said quietly. "Someone from a dangerous world who might hurt us." "We see a predator," added Moriak, the Corvin boy. "Someone who is not afraid of things that should be feared." Jake nodded. "And when you look at that creature," he pointed to the shadow maw, "what do you see?" "A monster." Zixara, the Zephyrian, clicked. "The most dangerous kind of predator in the galaxy." "I see the same thing you see when you look at me," Jake said. This statement caused a ripple of confusion through the classroom. "But here's the thing. I'm not a monster, and neither is he." Jake walked to the center of the room so he could see all of his classmates. "On Earth, we have creatures just as dangerous as the shadow maw. We have tigers that can break a person's neck with one bite. We have bears that can tear through metal with their claws. We have sharks that can sense a drop of blood from miles away." The students listened intently, no longer whispering or trying to hide from him. "But we learned something important about these creatures," Jake continued. "They're not evil. They're not monsters. They're just animals trying to survive in their world, the same way we're trying to survive in ours." Dr. Zix then stepped forward. "But Jake, the psychic intimidation field, the aggressive behavior, the refusal to be contained peacefully. How do you explain these things?" "Fear," Jake said simply. "Everything that creature has done since it was captured has been because it's afraid. The psychic field, the aggression, even refusing to eat, they're all fear responses." Jake turned back to look at the shadow maw. The creature was still lying down, but its eyes tracked his movement. Think about it from his perspective. He was living his life on his home world, probably had a territory, maybe even a family. Then one day, strange creatures with advanced technology showed up, shot him with tranquilizers, and dragged him away from everything he knew. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the usual background hum of the space station seemed quieter. He woke up in a metal box, surrounded by smells and sounds he had never experienced before, Jake continued. Every day for 3 months, creatures he had never seen before came to stare at him, poke at him, study him. He had no idea if they were going to hurt him, kill him, or what. Velana spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "We never thought about it that way." "Most people don't," Jake said. "It's easier to think of dangerous things as monsters than to think of them as scared, confused animals. But the truth is, most of the time, the dangerous thing is more afraid of you than you are of it." Dr. Zixton was writing furiously on his tablet. This perspective could change how we approach Deathworld species entirely. Jake, how did humans develop this understanding? Jake thought about the question carefully. I think it's because we've been the scared animal before. Humans weren't always the dominant species on Earth. For most of our history, we were prey. We were hunted by bigger, stronger, faster creatures. We survived by learning to understand them, not by trying to fight them. He gestured toward the Shadow Maw. When I look at him, I don't see a monster. I see what humans might have become if we had evolved differently. Powerful, dangerous, but still just trying to survive. Moriak raised his rocky hand. But how did you know it would respond peacefully? What if it had attacked? It couldn't attack, Jake said. The containment field is too strong. But even if it could, I don't think it would have. Look at how it's positioned now. Everyone turned to look at the Shadow Maw. The creature was lying on its side, completely relaxed, still purring softly. That's not the position of a predator ready to attack, Jake explained. That's the position of an animal. That feels safe for the first time in months. Dr. Zix then approached the containment unit more closely than he had dared before. The stress indicators have dropped to almost zero. Its heart rate, breathing, even its brain activity patterns have normalized. Because someone finally treated it with respect instead of fear, Jake said. Zixara clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Jake, what do you think should happen to the creature now? Jake looked at the Shadow Maw, which seemed to sense his attention, and opened its eyes to look back at him. I think it should go home, he said. It's not a specimen or a research subject. It's a living being that was taken from its family and its world without its consent. But the scientific value, Dr. Zixton protested. Think of what we could learn. We've already learned the most important thing, Jake replied. We've learned that even the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy respond to understanding and compassion. We've learned that fear makes everything worse, while respect and empathy can solve problems that force and technology cannot. Jake walked back to the containment unit one more time. The Shadow Maw immediately stood up and approached the barrier, pressing its paw against the spot where Jake placed his hand. We've learned that monster is just a word we use for things we don't understand, Jake said, looking into the creature's amber eyes. And maybe, just maybe, we've learned that the galaxy is a lot less scary place when we try to understand each other instead of being afraid of each other. The Shadow Maw made its questioning sound one more time, but now it sounded almost like gratitude. Dr. Zix then put down his tablet and looked around at his students. I believe this has been the most educational class session in my entire career. Jake has shown us something that our textbooks and our instruments could not teach us. What's that, Professor? Velana asked. That the most powerful tool for understanding dangerous species is not technology or weapons or containment fields, Dr. Zixton said, his skin shifting to a warm, peaceful blue. It's empathy. As the class session ended and the students began to gather their belongings, Jake noticed that none of them moved away from him anymore. In fact, several of them approached him with questions about Earth and about how he had known what to do with the Shadow Maw. For the first time since arriving at the university, Jake felt like he was truly part of the class. And as he looked back at the Shadow Maw one last time before leaving, he saw something in those 6 amber eyes that he had not seen before. Hope.